Welcome to the EPTA conference of 2021. My name is Yayouk Willems. I'm a researcher at the Rathenau Institute. Today I will be replacing Petra Verhoef, also a coordinator at the Rathenau Institute, who unfortunately is ill today. But I feel very honored that I can take her place today because we have a very interesting program ready for you. A program centered around the newest publication of the EPTA network. The EPTA network consists of members of all over the world, in more than 21 countries, mostly in Europe, but also some outside of Europe, and 2 Europe-wide networks. And these members all focus on giving parliaments, policymakers, and society advice on the interplay between technology, science, and society. And this year, they together joined to write a very interesting and timely report, namely on the topic technology assessment and decision-making under scientific uncertainty, lessons from the COVID-19 pandemic. And this year, all the EPTA members looked at their own countries and investigated what happened during the COVID-19 pandemic, but they also looked forward to the future to tell us what do we have to discuss for a more resilient society in the times when the pandemic is still with us, but also when we have still some crises ahead of us. Today, we are in The Hague, where the Rathenau Institute is located. It's also the place where our royal family lives and where our parliament is situated. It's here in The Hague this year because the Rathenau Institute is the president of the EPTA network. Normally we would invite you to come over to The Hague, we would show you the parliament, take our bikes to see the windmills. But as I said earlier, our report is very timely because we're still dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic. The Rathenau Institute spearheaded the EPTA report this year together with our wonderful collaborators from Norway, from the Norwegian Board of Technology, who I want to thank for the wonderful collaboration. And we used the input of members of all these 21 different countries around the world who are all with us today digitally. So I would invite all of you who are viewing to give comments, ask questions, put them in the chat. Also put down your name and your country, so I'll try to incorporate it in our sessions today. On the program, we start with a brief presentation of the EPTA report, and then we have 2 panel discussions with politicians, policymakers, and technology assessment specialists to go over the lessons of the report. So, I want to open this session with a presentation by my wonderful colleague Rosanne van Edelenbos, who's going to give us some insights for the report. Rosanne, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rosanne Edelenbos, and I'm a senior researcher at the Rathenau Institute. So I have 10 minutes to tell you all about the report. Not a very long time for such a comprehensive document. It was written to provide the insights into what politicians, policymakers, and citizens can learn from the COVID-19 pandemic about the use of science and technology in crisis situations. And also the momentum created by the pandemic can serve as an opportunity to rethink how technology assessment institutes can better facilitate political decision-making in these times. So I'm proud to represent the Norwegian Board of Technology and the Rathenau Institute. These are the colleagues with which we wrote the synthesis of the report. The COVID-19 crisis. It was, of course, first of all, a health crisis, but it was also an economic and a social crisis. And science and technology played a very important role, a crucial role in both mitigating the pandemic and adapting our lives to it. So we can view the pandemic as a pressure cooker experiment for the use of digital technology. And an example of that is the COVID-19 tracker, which was used in almost all EPTA network countries, but it didn't really deliver on its promise because it was not downloaded enough by citizens. Another example of the role that technology played was the use of digital technology to carry on with normal life at a social distance. So here we have a picture of the directors' meeting last April. And right now you're actually in a video conference watching another video conference, MetaZoom. Of course, science itself also played a very important role. The use of science has been under a social magnifying glass. And scientists and doctors were on a central stage of decision making. But even scientists have different perspectives. And does the white coat trump the social scientists, for example? And actually what we see here is Trump's doctor trying to dodge questions about his positive COVID-19 status. So yeah, this jumble of images illustrates all the different ways in which science and technology has interacted with politics and society. Before I present some of the results of the report, I want to say something about the methods that we used. So each EPTA member was sent a questionnaire before the directors' meeting about their role, about the role of their institute during the pandemic. And then after the directors' meeting, we sent a template with questions which a large number of EPTA members filled in. So we have 23 EPTA members in total, of which 18 members contributed, 16 from different countries all over the world, as you can see in green, and 2 from the EU in general. Those are the striped countries. So that was the European Parliament and the Council of Europe. And then the two institutes worked together to synthesize the results. First of all, we had a chapter about the role and technology of technology and science in the COVID-19 pandemic. Second is a chapter about the challenges and opportunities for parliamentary technology assessment. And then we want to look more forward into emerging issues in a post-COVID world. So technology played a very important role in mitigating the spreading of the disease. First of all, vaccines and biotech, of course, were very important. As I mentioned before, the digital contact tracing, and right now we are working with digital COVID-19 certificates in the EU, and it was actually a very successful joint development and unique from a global perspective that we made it possible to travel across borders in these times using this certificate. But at the same time, there is a lot of societal criticism to this QR code. Then we also try to adapt to the new situation. Of course, the closing down of public spaces, we used more digitalization, schools, workplaces, for example. The digital tools allowed us to continue many activities. We see new habits for traveling. So there has been a decrease in public transport at the beginning of the pandemic, and we saw an increase in more individualized travel innovations, such as car sharing. And finally, we saw innovation for mobilizing knowledge and insights. During the pandemic, there were dashboards everywhere that combined different types of data and made it possible to get insights at a glance for policymakers, but also for citizens. And this map is an example of that. It predicts new outbreaks within the Netherlands. Okay, challenges and opportunities for parliamentary technology assessment. Most countries were underprepared for this relatively novel threat, even though, of course, we knew that there was a possibility of a pandemic hitting. Governments turned to experts for advice, and in the initial phase of the crisis, there was a firm reliance on experts mainly from the biomedical sciences. After the first wave had been lifted, the debate within Parliament broadened and included more parties from society. But of course, it's difficult to make decisions with so many sources of knowledge and so many interests at stake. So an important challenge is for governments, scientists, and technology assessment moving forward is to optimally organize and facilitate advice on technology and science in times of urgency and crisis. Then balancing reflection and action. In times of urgency, it doesn't really match with the scientific process, which takes a long time. At the same time, reflection is very important. So decision makers have to balance reflection and action, and EPTA members responded to this by introducing new formats for providing advice that are faster and shorter. And more work can be done there as well. Then there's a need for transparency to keep public trust. Of course, decisions cannot be based on science alone. There are other considerations that play a role: societal, economic, political decisions. And it's important that politicians are clear about this, and they are transparent and open about which considerations play a role. And EPTA institutions can provide guidance in that, and they are specifically skilled to include the public in these types of discussions. And finally, we need to be better prepared for the unknown. So anticipatory governance is very important. And governments can be more adaptable and dynamic. And several EPTA members have given suggestions for this, like using methods from the field of foresight. So if we look forward, what emerging issues are there in a post-COVID world if we want to use digitalization and transnational cooperation to build societies that are more resilient? Due to the urgency of the crisis, discussions about socially responsible digitalization has been put on the back burner sometimes, but now we need to put that back on the agenda and work on digitalization that is inclusive, fair, and sustainable. Of course, we have the telework revolution. Now is the time to discuss which combinations of physical and virtual arrangements work best and are inclusive, responsible, and holistic. Third, the pandemic disclosed deficits in our systems, in our European systems, for example, the shortage of medical supplies. So we need transnational discussions about how to bolster these transnational and national supply chains. The pandemic has shown how vulnerable we are. We have a complex society in which technology, medicine, economics, digitalization are all interconnected, and this perspective needs to be better integrated in policymaking. Fifth, health data sharing. We've seen a further leap in the digitalization of health, and more efficient transnational analysis of this health data requires also a better health data sharing and a better system to help with this. But at the same time, we need to safeguard EU citizens' rights. And finally, well, we see it now, we're living with COVID in the long run, and countries will need to maintain their efforts to contain, prevent, and treat it. And the technology assessment institutes can support governments and decision makers with each of these 6 points, and we should aim to provide timely, balanced, comprehensive, and of course independent information on how to deal with science and technology in an appropriate way in the future. So the full report can be found here on this website, and of course if you have any questions, feel free to email Sophie or myself about it, or to ask questions, of course, in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosanne. Thank you so much for a very clear and brief overview of the report. The next phase, I would like to invite our honorable guest, Mark Roskam-Abing, to the table. I'm just going to put myself in the middle of the table again. Welcome, Mark Roskam-Abing. He is a Program Director General of Society and COVID-19. I think in this title, especially the part society is very important, because you were not combating the virus itself, but particularly this program was set up to analyze and investigate the influence of COVID-19 on society. And I have the honorable task to hand you over the EPTA report, which will be published on the website of the Rathenau Institute. And by handing it over to you, we symbolically want to give to society and the world generally the lessons to build a more resilient society where we take digitalization and science and technology incorporated for a more resilient society. We have sent it to you before, so he has read it before, not that he has to read it right now, so he can already give a brief reflection. I'm very curious to hear your thoughts.
Thanks very much. First, the honor is all mine. I'm very honored to be here and to be able to accept this report. Indeed, the word society is the operative word in my function title, and that expresses the thought that this crisis is not just about health, it's also a societal crisis. I would like to thank you, but all the members of EPTA for all the work that they've done throughout the European Union, not just in preparing this report, but more general by giving their perspectives during the crisis. Because of course, science and technology have been extremely important in dealing with this crisis. Unfortunately, the pandemic is not yet over, although many, including myself, I must admit, would have thought that by now, with so many people vaccinated, a year and a half in the crisis, we could have relaxed a little, but alas, that does not seem to be the case just yet. And I make this point also because I would like to stress that for me, and I guess for the Dutch government, it's still a bit early days to have completed our evaluations already. And of course, you have done a lot of evaluations, and this will help us. But every day, people do still die of COVID in the Netherlands and all around the world. And I'm also quite certain that much of the psychological, social and economical impact of this crisis is still yet to come. And it will only become clear in the coming years. So the work is not done, far from that, and maybe there will be another report from you coming on this topic in a few years from now. At the moment, all help is still needed, and certainly those of the extended scientific community, also in relation to innovative technology to fight COVID. And to give one example in line with the issues discussed in the report, here in the Netherlands, many scientists of almost as many different backgrounds have helped us to both assess and improve the health impact and societal impact of the worldwide much discussed digital contact tracing apps. There were 2 task forces staffed by virologists, epidemiologists, that's a difficult word, e-health scientists, but also communication scientists, behavioral scientists, data scientists on board. Ethical scientists and an ethical panel were also asked to help, and then one of the people on that panel will be joining us later in this panel. And we did a scientific evaluation. All these scientists helped us, and because of all these science efforts, we now have a much better understanding of digital contact tracing, and also what works, but also what doesn't work. And we share this knowledge all around the world. With regard to another topic, assessing the lessons from decision-making under scientific uncertainty, I think one cannot stress the overall uncertainty enough. As our Prime Minister said, and that's also quoted in the report, in the country report for the Netherlands, at the beginning of the crisis, a year and a half ago, he said we have to take 100% of the decisions with only 50% of the knowledge. And in hindsight, I would suggest that this 50% was a gross overstatement. And only now, 1.5 years down the road, are we starting to understand the situation in some detail, thanks to science, working around the clock. While it is absolutely interesting to look at the differences, and they also become evident in the country chapters in the report. I must say I'm also struck by the similarities across many countries. Of course, politicians and opinion leaders in many individual countries would like us to believe that individual choices have been paramount and stress the subsequent negative or positive outcomes, regardless of with regard to their position. If you take a step back, I think it becomes clear that most countries have actually taken very similar approaches when it comes to contact tracing apps, using digital COVID certificates, but also closing nightclubs, keeping schools open as long as possible, promoting work from home, and also very similar discussions on privacy and on ethical issues such as vaccination mandates. I would also, and that's also maybe a little bit even more controversial, but I would also suggest that the outcomes across different countries have actually been quite similar if you do correct for individual characteristics. So what's the point I'm making? Am I saying that politics don't matter, governments don't matter? Well, that would maybe be a bit bold coming from a civil servant like me. But what I am saying is that science matters. And fortunately, the scientific community is not restricted by national borders or national politics. And then thanks to organizations such as EPTA, knowledge can spread around the globe even faster than virus. So therefore, I think you do see the same policies all over the world. Finally, is cooperation with scientists and experts enough? Will this help us to tackle this crisis? Well, yes and no. I think in the end, we do need to, of course, we need to be in touch with the experts, and we are in touch with the experts. But we also need to be in touch with society itself, and this is one of the things that can be easily forgotten. It was one of the tasks given to my organization, and in our discussions with society, we discovered a number of post-COVID challenges that we have to tackle in the years to come. You mentioned 6 earlier on from your perspective. We also have 6. Maybe we can discuss them later on during the panel. I'd like to finish by saying that even if the crisis is over, the issues following from the crisis are far from over, and in the many years ahead, there's still a lot of work for all of us to do. We will need science working together across the borders to help us deal with those challenges. So I do hope that EPTA, you will keep up the work and continue making reports like this, because we do need them at the government. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark, for the encouraging words and the beautiful compliments. There is, as you heard, much to talk, so that's also what we're planning to do at the moment. So I would like to invite 2 more panelists to the table. I will, Sophie van Balen and Rini van Est, they will get an introduction later when I'll give the floor to them. Welcome. And to start, Mark will also be at our panel, and like he said, he quoted a sentence of our Prime Minister that 100% of the decisions had to be made based on 50% of the knowledge we had, and that might still have been an overstatement because we had much less. And that's what we're also going to discuss during this panel. Namely, how do we make substantiated policy decisions under pressure, and how do we, so policymakers, in the next panel politicians, but also technology assessment specialists, what have we learned from the COVID-19 crisis? So I would like to start with you, Mark. Also, as Program Director of Society in COVID-19, you have organized also dialogues in society to not only include scientists, but also to include citizens, people from businesses. And I'm very curious to hear your reflection on this. What did you learn? What were the challenges and the opportunities?
Well, maybe first with a meta observation. In the middle of a crisis, almost everybody is focused with dealing with immediate crisis, and most of the decision makers, for them, they struggle to think further ahead than even 1 week. And that's not a criticism; that's just a fact of life. Mm-hmm. That's the way the crisis is. So understandably, it's difficult to take a step back and start a broader dialogue with society. And so I'm very glad that I was asked to do this by the government, and I think it was a very good idea. Again, another meta observation, at the start, some people were a little bit skeptical. Do people really want to have this dialogue with government and talk about the future after the COVID crisis while we're still in the middle and maybe even in a lockdown? But in fact, especially during this crisis and especially even during the lockdown, people wanted to be able to think about what would the Netherlands be like after the crisis. So actually, it was a very welcome development and people really wanted to have this opportunity. So that was in itself good. So even if there was no other result from the dialogue, even the dialogue itself as an instrument, I think was very good for the government to be able to be in touch with the broader society. But luckily, there was also some outcome that I think is quite important. I don't know how much time I have. I mentioned
you go. I'm very curious to hear. Let's go, and I'll let you know when we have to.
I think there were six issues that came out of this dialogue that were broadly shared. It's not rocket science, of course, because if you start a dialogue with broader society and you're completely surprised about what it returns, and you have not been paying attention, of course. Yet still, 6 themes. One about inequality, new inequalities. I am personally very worried that for a lot of people in the Netherlands, in a few months from now, they will be back to their normal life. They'll still have their job, and COVID is something that's behind them. For some people, it's a small group, but some people have been hit by COVID crisis in many different aspects at the same time. They may have lost their job because it was a flex job. Their children had to do homeschooling, but because at home they don't have computers or they don't speak the Dutch fluently, homeschooling wasn't very successful. They live in a small house with not a lot of green outdoors where they can go for a walk. And all these things come together. And that concerns us because we think in the years to come we will still see these, especially people living in the poorer areas of the big cities, that they've been hit from left and right, front and center, and they will still suffer from this crisis. So that's one thing, inequalities. On a more positive note, a lot of people mentioned that maybe this is sort of a circuit breaker, this crisis, and they could start thinking about more sustainable way of living. A sustainable economic recovery. It might almost be too late already because the economic recovery is going so fast. But a lot of people were making this point that they wanted to have a more sustainable economic recovery. Of course, saying is one thing, doing is something else. But for the government, that could be an opportunity. If so many people say that they want this, well, let's help them put their words into actions a little bit. I think a lot of people started to appreciate the green environment a lot more during this crisis. Many people went out for walks during lockdowns. And that also makes us rethink how we should shape areas. Social and mental resilience was an issue. A lot of people have become lonely and also led to their thinking also becoming a little bit more restrained. How can we help people get in touch with other people again and start talking to each other again a bit more? And we also have some ideas on that. Of course, a topic that's been also addressed in the EPTA report in depth is living in a blended society, working from home and then working at the office, and how can you deal with that? And a very government-oriented topic, that's the last topic, is how do we do the decision making? That includes how do we take decisions at a national level and at a local level, but it also includes how do we draw in the advice from experts, from scientists. We've done a lot of ad hoc things during this crisis, and that worked out quite okay. But I think we should also learn from that and consider if some things we can maybe organize better for the future and make more structural.
Yeah. Thanks, Mark. And it's interesting also to see also to see so many overlap between our findings
absolutely.
and what Rosanne just presented and yours.
Yeah.
We have later some time also for discussions and questions, but we're now going from, for us, the offline world to the online world, because I want to invite an international guest from Norway, Tore Tennø from... there I can see him. Yes, welcome, Tore. He is the director of the Norwegian Board of Technology. Thank you very much for being here, Tore. And I'm very curious to hear your reflections on taking decisions under pressure in Norway and how science and technology and innovation was incorporated. Or maybe if you heard some things that Mark was saying, did you hear, was it recognizable? Was it very different? The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I'm actually here in Oslo with the Dutch king, who is visiting today. So there were a lot of brass bands outside my window. But that's back to normal, that's good. It's definitely recognizable. I would say for Norway, it's been going relatively well with pretty low death and infection rates, quite open society, we closed schools, restricted travels, but there were no curfews, and a pretty quick economic recovery. So we already had a commission who's still working, but in the first publication, it said it managed pretty well. We had some, let's say, digital work has proved very helpful. Remote work has functioned well. There is more worry about schools and education. So there's more inequality when it comes to homeschooling, as it was mentioned here. You have a big house, do you have computers, do you have a parent that can help you? Education with students normally relying on part-time work, more loneliness, more dropout. There's also the question of the economic recovery in Norway that has been good, but it's also not been especially green. It has relied on also tax breaks to the oil and gas industry. The lobby was prepared, acted quickly. So science advice, I would say in the beginning especially, but throughout the pandemic, centrally located were the epidemiologists.
Yeah, it stays a difficult word for everyone.
And the economists. And in the beginning, the commission gave some criticism that in the beginning it wasn't even constitutionally followed. They didn't follow the constitutional rules, so the experts made the first decisions. And you also didn't have a thorough human rights assessment. I would say, on the positive note, the health experts have been very clear about uncertainties. Say, this is how much we know. We don't know about this, but we have to make a decision. This is how we're going forward. And eventually, after the beginning, policymakers came back saying, okay, we know that we can skew vaccine distribution, perhaps to optimize the situation medically, but we don't do it for other reasons. So policy was back. There was some development in assessing the technology and how to involve people. Let me give an example. So you had first the discussion, I guess, many countries had about the contact tracing app. So we actually had two versions of it. And the first version made domestically which was considered good, of course, but ran into trouble because of privacy discussions. How many consent considerations? Should you give one consent or three consents? How do you use the data? Do you use it also for future pandemics? So I would say they just had to close it down and make a new one. And then came the second discussion about corona certificates, where we had a much more open debate from the beginning, more consultation. We had an open digital meeting in Parliament about it. We had also the health experts opened like a Slack channel, actually, where a lot of people, a lot of stakeholders could join in. People from law, sociology, technology, privacy. So you had much more activity and participation from different interests and thinkers. And I think we had learned from the first round concerning with the contact tracing app. And of course, a lot of discussion about preparation. This is not a black swan, it's a gray rhino. So we can see it, we knew about it, we knew it with the Rake Havoc. So it wasn't a lack of, in a way, scenarios or anticipation, it was a lack of following up on it.
Yeah. Thank you, Tore. And you briefly mentioned the use also of Slack. Can I compare it also to what Mark said, the inclusion of citizens also in this decision making, or was it still mostly the experts who were giving the advice?
I would say mostly different kinds of experts, but open for you didn't have to have an institutional affiliation or so. But we didn't have that kind of social inclusion exercise that you apparently did have in Holland. So that's just very interesting to hear about that. Yeah. And I like to read the report and more about the 6 points.
Yeah. Well, we'll send it through. Thank you, Tore. We'll keep you online here in case we still have some questions later. I'll get back to that later. Thank you so much. I'm going back again from online to offline for here in the studio. And I would like to give the word to Sophie van Balen, also a very dear colleague of mine at the Rathenau Institute, and the first author of the EPTA report. So thank you for being here. And you also have some very interesting insights because you've been through all the submissions of all the different countries on how different countries made decisions under pressure. And I would like to ask you how to reflect on that, or also what has been said, maybe more specifically how to include citizens in this decision making.
Well, thank you, Jajuk, and also thank you, Mark and Tore, for your comments. And first, I'd like to say yes, Mark's. What Mark said resonated with me as well about the similar approaches and the similar debates. As we were going through all of the reports and we were discussing it also with the Norwegian team, we realized how similar the experiences around COVID-19 and the pandemic are across countries, even though I have experienced it very much as a kind of a national problem, right? So I think this is already a point where we can learn, and I think it's of course it's changed over time, but still the realization that this was a global problem as an individual, maybe because we were also so much stuck at home and confined to our own direct environment that it only hit upon me when we were going through all these country reports from all over the world. And so in the report, as Rosanne mentioned, we see, what we see is that science and science advice has been such a crucial element of this pandemic that it sets it apart from many other crises before. And that has put a magnifying glass not only on science, but what it means in relation to decision making for policymakers. And that has come with some challenges, and one of them was making decisions in real time, both reflecting on science, even though you have only a very small portion of knowledge, and you even don't really know if this knowledge is correct. It might be changed at a later time, but you have to make decisions as a policy maker. And it was difficult in the beginning, but I think TA, as being very experienced in making these kinds of reflections, have helped or could have helped with these kinds of decisions by reflecting on what's available, and also reflecting on similarities with previous decisions. So there are some examples. For example, in the UK, the Post have developed rapid response publications. So they put out a lot of publications that were released in days instead of months. I don't know exactly how they've done it, but I guess they cleared a lot of their other works. And it's similar to what GAO in the US did, GAO. And then in Norway, and also ourselves in the Rathenau Institute, we already have a format in which we write letters to the parliament. And we have launched several of those short briefings about science and technology related aspects in the COVID-19, such as the digital contract tracing app. But in Finland, they turn it around. The Committee of the Future, they asked their members of parliament to ask questions, and then they looked for different types of experts that could answer these questions. So they wrote a response, and they had also several meetings to discuss these questions. And in the end, they compiled a report in which several experts had an in-depth, more comprehensive analysis of those questions. So that was the first question, the being rapid, but also being able to reflect on what's important. And the other important challenge was being transparent about the decisions that we made. And I think the first reflex of policymakers was to refer to the scientific evidence that was available without to substantiate their decisions. But they sometimes forgot to acknowledge the role of other considerations, like economics considerations, or considerations of different values that were at stake in making these decisions, such as maybe environmental considerations that could have gone into their decisions, like the oil and gas lobby from Norway. And so, but at the same time, we see in the debate that the way scientific evidence influences political decision-making does have come under a magnifying glass, and it is discussed within society a lot. So it has developed into more mature debates, but not being reflective as policymakers about open and transparent about where the science advice ends and where the politics begins, where the other considerations begin, leave space for conspiracy and for just making other theories about what were those considerations.
Thank you, Sophie. Those were indeed, and I think we now also have someone who can already give some interesting reflections on this on the table, who is Rini van Est, also a coordinator at the Rathenau Institute, and a professor also in, and I have to say it correctly, Technology Assessment and Governance in Eindhoven, and to the EPTA network as someone who's very familiar. I think you have seen many EPTA conferences in real life. So hopefully this will be possible again in the coming years. And Sophie also coined something that I've also heard you saying before about this making decisions in real time, about technology assessment in real time. Can you maybe reflect on this or some other points that have been said from the role of technology assessment and in its international context?
Yeah, I'll try to do that, Yayuk, because already a lot of things have been, said around the table, very interesting things, which I also had, on my list. But let me try to kind of bring it maybe to another level. I think first of all, you heard some, the basic challenge is, okay, how do we get an open, very diverse discussion on what is happening in the COVID crisis? Mark told about that. Tore, I heard Sophie talking about that too. So how do we get a diversity of voices, diversity of experts, and a diversity of voices from society, citizens? How do we get that voice into the debate? That's one of the big challenges. The interesting thing, I think, about the COVID crisis was that technology was all around us. You see, because there were all kinds of technologies central in this debate, and the whole society actually was talking about. And for technology assessment institutes, it's very important to look at the public debate. Is the public debate developing well or not? So we call that informal technology assessment. And what was also happening during this COVID crisis was what you could say real-time technology assessment. So things were happening real time. For example, this boom in the use of all kinds of digital media, you see. The media were there, but they weren't used because of social taboos or all that kind of thing. But then came the crisis and the lockdown, and suddenly these technologies that were there were, massively used. So that was, from a technology assessment point of view, quite interesting, because I think normally we do an assessment and we have to wait for years and years to come before this technology comes onto the market. And now the technology was there but wasn't really used massively, and then it suddenly became used massively. So we needed to have some real-time. Interesting thing, Mark said, the government had to decide, make 100% decisions based on 50% of knowledge. I think the technology assessment community had a lot of knowledge. So if Sophie talked about, Post having this rapid response, you can only have a rapid response if you have the knowledge there. So the interesting thing is that for a lot of things, a lot of developments, if you're talking about this tracing app, or the vaccines discussion. I mean, these are very familiar discussions. And then, of course, the challenge becomes, how do we get this type of knowledge into the debate? Or is the debate already happening in a very smooth way?
And what would you say during Corona? Did it happen in a smooth way, or would you now say?
I don't think it happened in a smooth way. Mark was, the points he made about, the new inequalities, they boomed. So we didn't really, efficiently address that issue. The whole idea that, this crisis was also, kind of a volcano of new opportunities. For example, for the sustainability discussion. So did we connect this Corona crisis with all kinds of discussions about the city, about mobility, about sustainable energy? We didn't do enough of that, I think.
Would you say technology, from the technology assessment community, society?
Also from the technology assessment community. I think we did our best. Yeah. What I saw from I think you framed it nicely, Sophie, that you say, okay, we thought it was a national topic. It's not a national topic. It's not even a European topic. It's a global topic. You see, but did we involve in our assessments the needs of developing countries? What's happening outside of Europe? In the Netherlands, did we look at Italy or what happened in Spain? No, we were kind of focused on our own problems. So what I saw in the country reports is that the way we responded, you know, had a very strong contextual
Framework.
framework, you could say. It depended on how the institutes, the TA institutes, were, you know, institutionalized, what their relationship with society and the parliament was, and also what their procedures were. So how they developed their project. So I think a lot of organizations kind of worked in this crisis the way they were used
To work.
And so if the context, if the institutional setting was, you know, more beneficial, it would be easier. But, you know, well, that's my.
Because is that also something that resonates with you? Maar what Rini is saying, in that it indeed also is very much context dependent. You also looked at, of course, how different governments took decisions under pressure in different countries.
Yes, although I would still say that in the end many countries did lots of the same things and the outcomes were also quite similar. Of course, at the same time, yes, indeed, you do see differences. And for a large part of this crisis, we in the Netherlands had a caretaker government, for instance. And I think that might be one of the reasons why we didn't feel comfortable to link dealing with the acute COVID crisis, trying to link it with larger issues such as sustainability. The idea is that dealing with sustainability is something for the next government.
Like also what Tore indeed also said,
And in a way it's a missed opportunity.
Yeah.
I think we all agree on that. At the same time, it's also a fact of life, and we are a democracy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would you say, Rini, in the future to make us as the TA community more resilient? It's a big question, brief answer.
Well, I would say I think it's a very good thing that now, after 1.5 years in the crisis, we look back and reflect on this. I think maybe, but I think we should have done that earlier. Maybe already after 3 months, because then we would have noticed that indeed what is happening in the Netherlands or in Norway or in Spain is quite similar. You know, and so we're facing the same kind of problems. And we have a similar type of discussions and maybe similar types of solutions too. And I think what we could have learned from the methods, or maybe small changes in organizational procedures that happened in the different institutes as a reaction on this crisis.
Yeah.
If I may, just from a policy perspective, we did try to inform us by bad practices from other. Every time we have a session on the measures that we have to take at the Katshuis here in The Hague, we always have a slide, what are the policies in other countries and what are the results in other countries. I also know that our leading physician, Professor van Dissel, is in constant discussions with his counterparts in other countries. So what do you see happening? What are the measures taken? Do they work? So there is a lot of, but I mean, it may not be documented so much, but there is a lot of discussion, and also on a political level.
Yeah. But then maybe still, what would you say, Sophia? Like, well, this was a lot of work, but still having this in a short version every 3 months, would you think that would be fruitful for the TA community and for parliamentary advice?
I think, yes, I agree that we could have learned institutes that have also come up with very new and creative ways also to include the public during decision making. And I hear Tore's example of how the tracing app was developed, which resonated a lot with how it happened in the Netherlands, right? Where at first we had a different method and then something else.
What I see from the reports is, you know, kind of the first challenge is what's happening, making sense of actual developments. Then a second thing, what the Finnish Committee of the Future did was, okay, we'll have this crisis, let's already think about what's happening afterwards. And then
At the start of the crisis,
yes, and then a third thing, is like, okay, how does this connect to all kinds of other developments? I think at the Rathenau Institute, we were quite, well, focused on that. How does it relate to, in the discussion about information technology? How does it discuss, or how does it link to discussion about education or work or health, that type of things? So there are these three challenges we have as technology assessment institutes, and if we would have, have this discussion amongst our institutes earlier, we could have seen those lines of activity in which I thought was see.
Also for you from the policy making perspective, indeed something you would request or you would like as an input, or how?
Well,
what would the match be?
It would have been something we should have requested. Let me put it like that. If it would have happened in the heat of the first crisis, I'm afraid probably not, because then everybody was too focused on what will happen tomorrow or maybe next week, but nothing else. But and therefore, one of the lines I was discussing, one of the 6 points, is also how do we institutionalize cooperation between different levels of government, but also with the scientific community and maybe also with the general public. What can we learn from this crisis for future crises, and then how do we do this better?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I haven't answered that question yet,
No.
but it's one of the things that we are working on.
Yeah.
Is there time for a last remark, or maybe?
Yeah.
Well, what I experienced, which I thought was very interesting, also a bit threatening at the beginning of the crisis, there was this, we felt at the Rathenau Institute like a bit of hesitance. So what's our role in this crisis? And I think a lot of institutes in the Netherlands had that similar feeling, whether you talked about media or NGOs. What kind of role do we need to have? And that had to do with this, this tension between action. Everybody saw that the government needed to take action, and we needed to have a large societal acceptance of what was happening. At the same time, this idea that, okay, but we're a democracy, how to shape this democracy, and what's the democratic role in this sense of, a parliamentary TA institute. And that took 1 or 2 weeks, and then I think we kind of decided to actually stick with our own roles, and I think a lot of institutes did that. So then you could say, well, democracy was, for 1 or 2 weeks, they had a kind of pitch stop, and then things started again. Because, for example, in the Netherlands, if you talk about these contexts, as I said, technology assessment was all over the place. It was also all over the place in the media, and we were pleasantly surprised that happened. So we were kind of also proud about the fact that maybe you said the same thing, Tore, that we had this open society where a lot of things were discussed.
Yeah.
At the same time, a lot of things haven't been discussed.
Yeah, I quickly want to turn to Tore to see if he heard any points that resonated or that were indeed very similar or very different in Norway, also from a technology assessment perspective. Oh, I think we have to unmute Tore. Just gonna see.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I feel like one of those old guys on the balcony at the Muppet Show. But a lot of things resonated, and I'm thinking about the lessons for our work. So how to do things in real time. We were more open. We touched the topics as they were considered in Parliament and government. I think it's interesting what Coast UK did. They asked scientists, what data do you need to understand the crisis that's going on? The second thing is, how do we involve people digitally? That was what we were faced with during the crisis, and how we do that with the kind of quality, deliberative quality that we want to have. And I think we haven't cracked that nut quite yet, but we're working on it. And the third thing is about doing anticipation. And as Rini said, that's what we started to do, and the Finnish started to do during the crisis. now we have to think about the future, because now it's open. Things are opening up, and we can see things that we didn't see before. So we try to make this new normal report, trend report, and we just threw it out there in the first year, preparing for what's coming up. So it's kind of present, future, and we sketched it in a way. And I think that was very, very well received, because people were now, as it's stated in the report, also politicians see that we can do a lot more than we thought.
Yeah, thank
Actually,
you,
we can
Tore.
change a lot more than we thought. So it's been a kind of an open window. So very interesting experience.
That's great, and that sounds also a very optimistic note to start, or a positive note to end with. And I'm just quickly having a look at my colleague Rosanne to see if there's something, but we can also do looking at the time. I'm gonna move this to after the second panel. So I want to thank all the people at the panel. Rini and Mark are gonna leave. Sophie is gonna stay here. Tore, I also want to thank you very much for your presence. And after the break, we are going to reflect a little bit more on the lessons from the EPTA report with new panelists. I want to thank you all for being there and hope to see you in 10 minutes. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. Welcome back to the EPTA conference. We have a very interesting program, like you saw in the first half of the conference, where we discussed making substantiated policy decisions under pressure. Now we continue looking forward to the future and see what do we need to discuss, or what do we need to face in building more resilient societies in the future. As you can see, we have some new panelists at the table. I will introduce them to you in a bit. But before talking with them, as you can see in the report, we have 6 points of attention for decision making about science and technology in the future. And a couple of them I would like to discuss with the panelists today. One of them is Frans Brom, who's here at the table. Thank you very much for being here today. He's also familiar with the EPTA network, and he is good to be back, and it's good to have him here. And he is now the director of the Netherlands Scientific Council for Government Policy. And this year you have published a number of wonderful reports, specifically on COVID-19. For example, how to use knowledge in policy advice in times of crisis. But also, personally, my favorite report illustrating different scenarios of continuing our life with COVID-19 in our society.
Here I have it.
Great, also a beautiful front page, and it is also in English.
It will be published in English coming Tuesday, so it's a nearly finished translation, and Tuesday it will be free on our website.
Perfect. So on wrr.nl you will also find this report. And with you, Frans Brom, I would like to ask you a very broad but important question. How do we live with COVID-19 in the long run, and how do you think we have to or can build resilient societies, keeping science, technology and innovation in mind?
It's a very broad question, which gives me the opportunity to tell why we wrote our scenario studies. Because our scenario studies we wrote when we saw that the discussion was getting small, technical on one hand, and was really short-term perspective. And we thought that broadening that perspective in both sense, broadening the scientific perspective and broadening the times perspective would be important for government policy. And as nearly all things we did with regard to COVID, we didn't do them alone. We did this report we did together with the Netherlands Academy of Arts and Sciences, the Royal Academy, and that helped because it gives you a common voice. When we started with that project, we were fortunate that in Nature, Nikki Phillips, she wrote an article which had a title that COVID is here to stay. Already 16 February of this year, she wrote an article with scenarios for the future. And we took those Nature scenarios as a point of departure, and we did them think through for our national situation, for our specific situation. And we did that not because we think it is a kind of booklet how we will think, and you choose one scenario and follow it, but more as an instrument to open up, broadening the thinking. And that's what I liked in your country overview report, that, for instance, the European Parliament tried to do the same thing, also opening up for things where you make uncertainty more clear. We described 5 different scenarios, from, on the one hand, returning to normal, to, on the other hand, the most extreme worst case scenario, and 3 scenarios in between, one we call flu extra, flu plus, COVID becomes an endemic with annual waves, or an external threat outside of Europe, outside of the rich countries. There will still be new developments in COVID, or the continuous struggle where COVID will be in a continuous struggle. We win a bit, we lose a bit, we win a bit, we lose a bit. And often if we present these scenarios, policymakers say, which scenario is most probable, of in which scenario are we? And that's a understandable but a wrong question. Understandable because we want to know where we are. Wrong because what we wanted to make clear with these scenarios is that we need to place this uncertainty about the development of the COVID in the heart of our policy making. We don't know how the pandemic will develop. We have hopes. Personally, I hope for return to normal, like most of us do. But we shouldn't build all our policy measures on hope alone. In the Netherlands, we do not do water management and building dikes in the hope there will be no storm. You have to be realistic and prepare also for the bad situations in building societal infrastructures.
So you would say, indeed, in building this resilience in the future, build in actually more of this uncertainty, right? If I understand correctly, yeah.
And that implies that has an enormous consequences for the kind of communication governments will have with society. I'm not sure about all countries, but I see in many countries that there is a shortism in communication. We only need the next step. If everybody is vaccinated, and then it will be over. Mm-hmm. It might be, I hope so, but we need to, as a society, accept that this might be something for the very long run. Hopefully not, but still, it is a possibility, and that possibility we need to take serious, because otherwise you get short-term measurements, and if they don't work, you get a lot of anger because we were promised that if we take this step, things would be over. Mm-hmm. So that's a very important lesson, I would say, from our report, is think about preparing for different scenarios in your policy making. Second core message of our report is, and the first part of the report is describing all the impacts on society, and we heard already in the first discussion a lot of these impacts on society, on inequality, on health, etc. If we are fighting these consequences, we need to link them with the other challenges our society has. So don't take in isolation, like sometimes is done. Put some extra money in education, mm-hmm. because through COVID we need extra money in education, but take the whole educational system questions more in a general, in an integrated way. Mm-hmm. So that's the second core message. Take COVID as a step for integrated measurements.
Mm-hmm. So, and also going back actually to what Mark said in the previous panel, these challenges, inequality, opportunities, education, but then on a
higher
level.
They didn't pop up
mm-hmm.
because of COVID,
mm-hmm.
and the solution is not only what happened through COVID. So place them in a more integrated context.
Last
point, which we found when we did this project, was the whole crucial importance of social trust. It's also in your report, and I think it's a very important issue, especially with regard to conspiracy theories. A lot of conspiracy talking about governments who make step after step after step where people think what's next, which also helps in a wrong way to develop conspiracy theories. And I think what is very important in these issues is the whole problem of rule of law, of democracy, taking society with the government in policy making. In the first discussion it was, yeah, but it's a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
I think that was a valid argument for the first 3 to 6 months. We are more than 20 months now into the COVID crisis. It's not an outbreak anymore, or not only an outbreak. So, yes, in the start it was 100% measures with 50% of knowledge. Still, we don't have enough knowledge for all the measurements we take, but it's not a new crisis anymore. And I think we need to learn from earlier steps.
Yeah.
It's now it should be clear that the social sciences, the human sciences, technology assessment are needed next to the virological and medical knowledge.
So are needed, and also we can step up our game in that respect, which is also in line with our lessons of building a resilient society. Thank you, Frans. Afterwards, we have time for a panel discussion. We'll also give answers to some of your questions in the first half. We had a little technical issue, so we didn't see the questions. We'll try to incorporate them at the end. Thank you, Frans. I would now like to welcome an online guest. So we're going again from offline to online. I would like to welcome Kim van Sparretak, and I can see her now. Can you hear and see us?
Yes.
Yes, perfect. And we can see and hear you. Thank you, Kim, very much for being here with us today. Kim,
You're very welcome. Hi from Brussels.
Hi. There is a little bit of a delay, but what I'm gonna do is briefly gonna introduce you to the audience, Kim, and then give you the word, so the delay is not so much of a problem anymore. I'm very happy you're here, Kim, if I may call you Kim. I saw that yesterday you were at an event about toxic algorithms and manipulative business models. So I think this also really shows that inclusive, fair digitalization is really your specialization. And that's what I would also like to discuss with you today, because one of our lessons is that the urgency of the crisis made that socially responsible digitalization has really moved to the background in the political discussion. And we say it's a challenge to put this really back on the political agenda. And I'm very curious to hear how you reflect on this from an EU perspective, and what issues you, as a Europarliamentarian, will flag regarding responsible and social digitalization. Again, the floor is yours, Kim.
Thank you very much. I think you're very right that we actually have two ways in which the discussion about digitalization has changed. On the one hand, we have seen, of course, especially when we're talking, for example, about Facebook, the event yesterday was organized because of the visit of Facebook whistleblower Frances Haugen to the European Parliament. So we have seen the effect of people only being online and being manipulated by toxic algorithms, what that has as an effect on our society in sort of a crunched version during the pandemic, because people were primarily communicating online. So in that sense, talking about ethical, fair digitalization, inclusive societies, we have a bigger discussion now. But on the other hand, when we are looking at the kind of digitization that has indeed been implemented as quickly as possible, there indeed we see that, for example, fundamental rights have really been pushed a bit aside. Take, for example, the fact that, we have to continue taking exams at universities, But okay, then people have to be completely surveyed at home with several cameras in their room, completely, disregarding people's privacy, etc. Just because of for the idea of efficiency and continuing to go. So I completely agree with the finding in your report that we need digitalization that contributes to more resilient, inclusive, and fair societies, and technology that connects us, promotes an exchange of knowledge and information instead of dividing us and polarizing our societies. And I think one of the fundamental questions that we have to ask ourselves, where do we want to use technology? We can't have blind trust in data and algorithms. We've seen specifically in the Netherlands what happens if we have a blind trust in what an algorithm tells us when we're talking about the toeslagenaffaire. And today again, the Privacy Authority is sending a huge warning signal. Please don't continue with the new legislation that will has to detect fraudulent people, because now we might create another toeslagenaffaire. So let's not do that. But we have an opportunity right now to actually change this way of social scoring, having surveillance at work and education, or predictive policing with the AI Act. And why I am one of the EP negotiators on this proposal. But the proposal really needs improving. We need stronger bans, we need fundamental rights impact assessment. And what is happening now is that it actually has been written through a product safety lens rather than a fundamental rights lens. And this is, one of the questions that we really have to address when we are discussing on AI and the future of our digitalization. Where do we want to use technology and what kind of safeguards do we want? And this is definitely one of the things I will fight for. And then I don't know if I have to round off yet, but maybe as a last point, I think we have to discuss our dependence on big tech. If we really want more resilient, inclusive, and fair societies, or the dependence on big tech for digital infrastructures, but also, being the basis for a lot of our, democratic public debates nowadays, we're completely dependent on them. And we really have to make sure that we become less dependent, that they become less powerful, because if there's less power for big tech, there's more room for better private-friendly and sustainable alternatives. So this is one of the things that is very important, I think, that we discuss when we want, digitization to be something that's good, that connects us, that serves our societies, serves us, makes our lives easier, but not technology that rules us and destroys our lives.
Thank you so much, Kim. To have a brief follow-up question before I'm going to the next panelist, I would like to ask you, which role do you see for institutes like us, specialized in technology assessment and giving advice to Parliament and policymakers in supporting the European Parliament in making digitalization more equal?
I think it is very important. It's really crucial because, we know that big tech lobby spends more than 100 million euros a year on lobbying us policymakers. And it's very hard if we don't have, groups and institutions that do thorough research, that come from a legal basis and not from a how do I make the most profit basis, to support us in our work and to give us, decent advice based on facts and science on where we need to go. So very invaluable.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you so much. I'm going to leave you here present on the screen in the background in case there are any questions still coming from the audience. So stay tuned. Right. Thank you so much. And then I'm heading over to another honorable member today, Linda Kools, also a colleague at the Rathenau Institute and coordinator of one of the themes. And I actually want to continue with you on the same topic about, we were just talking about socially responsible digitalization. If you can reflect on what Kim said, but also more typically for the Dutch case, if you have any particular reflections.
Yes, I recognize a lot of what Kim has been saying and the kind of debates that we have been having in the Netherlands and also in Europe, but also across the world. So there's been, in the last 4 years, even before the pandemic, more awareness about public values, human rights, and the impact digitalization has on that. So the debate on that has become way more serious, and with all kinds of parties involved, NGOs, European Parliament, etc. But then, something interesting happened. That was the pandemic, and we went back into sort of an old reflex. Technological fixed solutions. The Corona contact tracing app will help us, or the digital certificates will help us. And the debate going, or the trust that we would put in these kind of digital solutions was very high, but the societal debate was broader. And it was more mature and more issues were brought up. And in the Netherlands, that was already in the making before the COVID pandemic, because I think one of the questions is how do the Dutch, how does the Dutch Parliament deal with digitalization? And there something unique has happened this year for the Netherlands, not for other EPTA members, and that is that we now have a Committee of Digital Affairs in the House of Representatives. And that was because they were feeling, they were losing grip, is that also an English word? Yes, I think so. On digitalization, it was decision making was ad hoc. It was not in an integral manner, because digitalization is everywhere. It's in the Committee of Health, it's in the Economic Affairs, it's in Home Affairs. So it was everywhere, but at the same time, not really being discussed. So since March this year, we have a Committee of Digital Affairs dealing with these kind of, that's the task, but they're only just beginning.
And how do you foresee the role of this committee also in the future for like ongoing, dealing with the ongoing pandemic and maybe dealing with the further upcoming crises?
Yes, well, they have now established 6 topics to start for themselves, and one of them is dealing with emerging technologies and new kind of technologies. So one of their tasks, you could say, is to be more forward-looking. But we all know how politicians or politics can also be, be in the moment about issues that are going on right now. So it will be really interesting to see how they will take this task on board, and also their task to be in touch with the other committees as well. So they have these 6 topics that are really, where they are in the lead, and they have other topics where they say, well, we want to support the other committees. Like, for example, data ethics, that happens at the Committee of Health, but it also happens in other departments, energy, etc. And I think it will be really interesting to see, but crucial, if they manage to really fulfill this supporting role, or when, it's also about being seen as a politician, and this is my team, and this is where I can show what I am doing. So it's quite a different role for a politician to take. So it will be, really interesting to see how that works out.
I'm just going back to Kim, just curious to hear if indeed this Commission of Digital Affairs, if this is also something that's being watched on European level, or if...
Well, we now in the European Parliament have a committee called Artificial Intelligence and the Digital Age. And this is also really a committee that just tries to look forward, tries to see what is actually happening in terms of digitalization and bringing it together. But indeed, in the European Parliament, we have the same problem that, it's very dispersed, and also on every big digital legislative file, we now have several committees working on it because, there is fundamental rights aspects, there is juridical aspects, there is, all the different aspects that have to then be regarded. So I think it's a very positive step forward. And one of the next things I think that is very important, what we do see also in other member states, is that you have a Minister of Digital Affairs, because then you can also really specifically have someone in the government that is also keeping track of what is happening. And my personal experience is that it is very useful in other member states.
Great, thank you, Kim. I'm heading over to you, Frans.
Yeah, interesting because my council will publish coming Thursday a report commissioned by government on the impact on public values by artificial intelligence. And one of the core things we will say Thursday, so please keep it quiet till Thursday, we will say Thursday is that artificial intelligence cannot be taken as a separate issue, but it evades, it permeates in every part of society, and that implies that you have to look at how to regulate it and how to discuss it and how to understand it in its context. So the contextualization will be one of the 6 points we make, but that will be a very important point. Look at the context in which something is and don't take it out. Second, which is, I would say, comparable with the discussion on COVID, it's not only about in COVID, not only about the medical side with artificial intelligence, it's not about the technical side. It's like cars. You need roads, you need driver license, etc. You need a lot more in order to have something like that arranged. So we will publish that report on Thursday, and the chair of the committee just mentioned will be there in the panel discussing it. And will also be online, but in Dutch, not for everybody.
So using some an online translator to find the reports. I get a sign that we might have a response or a question from the chat. I'm looking at you, Rosanna.
Yeah, I'll be reading out questions in the chat that are relevant, I think, to the discussion now. And there are also some questions about the previous sessions. If we have time, we might go into that. So Chris Tyler, I think from the UK, says, for those of us who have spent years arguing for better science advisory mechanisms in government, COVID-19 has been problematic. It's obvious, and in COVID it has been demonstrated that the quality of science advisory mechanisms doesn't really matter if the political decision makers are incompetent. So this has been a problem in the UK and a massive problem in the US under the previous administration. In Europe, performance has varied a lot, and this stresses the importance of legislatures holding governments to account. So his question is, does the panel think that science advisors working in legislatures have learned about holding the government to account in a long-running emergency like COVID? Yeah.
I don't know if someone wants to...
Well, it's Chris who's asked the question, also familiar face in EPTA.
Good.
So I will try say a few things. I think one point he makes very clear is that up until now we focused a lot on the quality and transparency of science advice. And I think that was a good thing to do. But we need to step up and make sure that it's not only science advice, but also that society is taken aboard in order to help politicians to take their responsibility. Because you can't force responsibility upon someone, but I think that transparency is including society, make it more political. Something Rini would say is really would make that happen.
Yeah, that would also be my, I'm a colleague of Rini, and we're old colleagues, so perhaps that's not surprising, but showing the political choices. I think there was also in the first panel that for a long time the government has said this is the only choice we have, and this is what our scientific advice is giving us. And that is a little bit opening up now, I think, in the last decision that showed a little bit more of a political choice. So we don't know everything, but this is what we choose. And looking forward, really making clear also what Kim was talking about. There are a lot of political choices to be made about digitalization. And it's not just happening to us. We can act, and we can, it's about different views and visions of society that also shape or influence digitalization. So making that way more clear is also important, I think.
Thank you, Lina. Thank you, Frans. I'm just looking at Rosanna to see if there was an additional question, or otherwise I'm going to give Sophie the floor.
Yeah, there are some questions about the previous sessions.
Oh, perfect. Okay, and then I'm going to go over for Sophie, and because we have a couple of lessons, we talked about making society more resilient, incorporating also this uncertainty. We talked about making digitalization more social and fair with Linda and with Kim. One other very important lesson concerns health data, which on the one hand was very valuable during COVID because of getting knowledge and for the development of vaccines. At the same time, it's also something that has some complications. So I'm very curious, Sophie, if you can share us a little bit your perspective on the future of health data sharing.
Yes. Well, in the previous panel, we talked also about better collaboration between countries, right? And this is, I think, the sharing of health data is a very concrete way of improving or increasing the collaborations, at least across the EU. And we know that there are also some initiatives about organizing across the EU to organize this, but it is challenging, and it's because when we talk about health data, we're talking about data that is collected in a relationship between a patient and a doctor in the context of that doctor treating the patient, and then the question is, how much do we want to have that data being used for other purposes, such as research? And research can be for the public good about public health, but it can also be used by companies or by big tech to develop all kinds of products that they will use to sell. So then one question is, what do we want this data to be used for? And the other one is, what are the rules, especially already now? And I think what we saw and what I heard Mark in an earlier discussion that I had with him talk about is also that governments already are quite confused about what's and doctors as well, what they can do now already within their nations. So organizing a system that goes across the EU and across different nations is a very big challenge. Well, I don't want to... well, actually, the Rathenau Institute wrote a report on this last year. It's called Data Solidarity. And I don't want to go over all of the challenges that we identify because of the time, but I think a role for EPTA institutes can be to help their governments and their parliaments to kind of identify the different challenges within their nations and also help them then find different solutions across the nations to really find a system across the EU that works well, that helps exchanging health data, but also safeguards the citizens, the rights of the citizens and the public values within which you're sharing this data.
Great, and is also in the Commission of Digital Affairs, does it also specifically focus on health data? Is this something they should?
Well, their own topic is data ethics, for example, and human rights, fundamental rights. And they are sort of following what is happening in the Committee of Health. But this, so they just starting, and this is one of the things they can learn about data being used in the energy sector. They can learn about data that's being used in education, and these are not all unique tales. Some they are really unique because you have contextual, you have laws, etc. But still, some similar mechanisms are going on, and if that's not combined, then we also miss something. So I really hope that here they will also be. Supporting the committee.
And that also resonates a bit with what Frans said, with the report about algorithms. Does that go also specifically into health data, or as it is?
I don't have that in my heart now. No. So I didn't write the report, of course. No. Colleagues did. So I know there is a case of health. Yes, there is health data is in the report.
Yeah, so that would be also interesting for us to connect. I'm also just briefly going to look if there are maybe questions. There were some questions in the previous panel. We can see if, even though we had a different mix of panelists, if we can still answer them. If not, we can also go to another question. Rosanne, do you have something interesting for us?
Yes, Armin Grunwald, he made an observation about the role of science, which was heavily present in the media, but also a cacophony of diverging statements from various disciplines and also from inside the same discipline. So there was a huge lack of in-depth interdisciplinary assessment. And Michael Nentwich from Austria responds that this is obviously a prime task for technology assessment, But the question is, how is our work scalable and accelerable in a short time? From Germany, there was an addition to this. I agree. Do we need a new form of real-time technology assessment that can provide faster advice? And then question, which I think many of us have, why wasn't the pandemic sufficiently on our TA radar? Or perhaps it was, but how can we be more responsive to this?
I'll just see if someone already wants to respond. Maybe Linda to.
Maybe about the ways to do or experiment with real-time technology assessment. That Rini was saying in the previous panel, responding in 3 days can only happen if you already have a body of knowledge and body of work there. And for us, that was also the case. So we did write, in fact, in 4 days, the message to Parliament about the first contact tracing app. And that could have only happened because we already had the report about health data, health innovation, about monitoring of employees, and all kinds of work of digitalization and issues that came across with that. And we could combine that. And also in other messages to Parliament, we could combine previous knowledge. We also tried new things, like doing, for example, we were already working on a project, the impact of digital tools in education. And we started with a blog series and also a survey to ask for real-time experiences with the homeschooling and blended learning, or it wasn't blended at the time, it was just at remote homeschooling and learning. And I think that's something that we need to reflect on. What has it brought us? Is that a good way to do it? Do we need different methods? And but also it was difficult to get through. I think normally you have your normal routes to reach Parliament. And in the crisis, especially the first 3 months, it was also difficult for us.
Yeah.
We explicitly chose in the first months not to interfere. It was difficult enough for government to deal with the virologists, the medical scientists, public health experts in coping with the first stage of the pandemic. And our task is long-term strategic policy. So we didn't want to step into something which is not our game, and in which we probably would walk in the way and make things more complicated than they already were. But during the whole crisis, for us became clear that in a crisis you need also people who are taking a step back and place the actual crisis in a long-term perspective. And that might not be necessarily the same people who do the day-to-day crisis management, but it needs to be linked to them. So that's why we did several actions. We participated in the Social Council think tank already from the start, which was a think tank Netherlands-wide that advised government on social policy issues regarding to the COVID pandemic. We worked together with the Health Council and with the Council for Public Policy Making on preparedness, a conference on preparedness, and a report on preparedness. You quoted it in the start. And then we worked with the World Academy. We did this long-term, different scenario aspects to feed in to the discussion. And when we published it early September, we didn't seek much media, but we tried to get it to policymakers. Unfortunately, because today it's clear how the pandemic is developing, and it's not developing as we thought a few weeks ago, at least as some thought a few weeks ago. We now have a lot of media attention, especially to our report, national newspapers, etc. Write on it, and there you see how important it is to prepare, as Linda just told, your long-term perspective to bring in at the moment it is needed.
And this is also Sophie, and when reading all the country reports, you indeed see also some institutes taking a step back, some institutes stepping forward.
Yes, so we see a lot of differences between how TA institutes handled the whole situations, and some have very direct connections with MP. They work directly with, for example, a specific committee, and then they can help those parliamentarians in guiding the questions and providing the information that they might require. Of course, this is the parliamentarians are not the ones making the decisions, but they are close to government, or to at least, and then there are TA institutes like us who had some initial hesitancy to kind of deal with the cacophony of voices and of what we heard in the media.
To be a part of that.
To be a part of that, yeah. And they were a little bit more taking a back seat, and then later on, from their own experiences. And there are even TA institutes that say we have a role, we have a reflective role, so they haven't been involved in the discussion debates up till now yet, but they are planning to reflect on the whole situation, to learn about it. So there are differences, and it has to do with the way the different institutes have been institutionalized within their countries.
Yeah.
On the agenda, I think for the long term is there are now there are decisions being taken that restructure the relation among citizens. Whether or not you are dangerous because maybe have a virus or not, is something which was before not when we were sitting both here. And now we have checked, discussed all these issues. Knowing already what we in TA, I still say, know is the amount of information analysis that will come up. We have the whole discussions we had in the past on lab, on the chip technologies, on biomedical technologies that tell us a lot about somebody's health status. If we link that as implications to the current decisions made in pandemic structures, things might look different. And I think it's absolutely a task of technology assessment institutes to show how a small decision about testing before a meeting would change if huge amounts of testing facilities are portable, accessible, and will be part of daily routine. That will really change our relationships. And I think it's not only about how we treat COVID-19. It has implications, or it could have implications, and I think that's a task for technology assessment. I think that given the biomedical technology that are developing, what this would change the relation among citizens.
Great, thank you. And I saw, Rosanne, there's some more feedback from the chat.
Yes, there's a lot of feedback, so I cannot go.
So we cannot answer.
I also have a specific,
gonna make a selection.
A specific question for Kim. We have the 6 attention points in the report. Maybe you can respond to the third point, which is about building stronger supply chains, like medical supply chains and vaccines in a transnational perspective. And what do you think is necessary for that? Yeah.
Okay, that's a really broad question, but you know, I think there's 2 things that are very important. First of all, we actually see that these big pharmaceutical companies have too much power, and that they are actually funded by you know, public money, and then they actually do everything they can to make as much profit as possible, and refuse to share their patents and their recipe for the vaccines with countries that really need it. Because you know, we are now talking about having a test society, having, you know, QR codes, but you know, in many other countries, like it's maybe 1% of the population that has been vaccinated, and not because of unwillingness, but because vaccines have just not arrived in, less wealthy countries than us here. So I think one of the things that is very important is that we challenge, this monopoly position of these big corporations and make sure that they share what they have, gathered through public knowledge and public funding with the world. And secondly, it's very important, we know that we're very dependent of third countries. We are very dependent, when it comes to masks and other things, and also, the basic resources that we need for our medical systems. It's very important that we become, more strategically autonomous in a way in Europe, and also, make our own, masks, etc. again, and are not that dependent on things coming from elsewhere.
Thank you, Kim. And I'm just looking at you, Rosanne, if there's any more questions for now to be discussed, or otherwise I'm slowly going to ask some last bits to the panel before closing off the conference. Yeah, perfect. So, and last words of all of you, because we're now talking about the future. What will be your takeaway message for the EPTA network now that we're still living in the pandemic, but also will still may face some crisis in the future? What would you say to the network as a takeaway message?
Yeah, it will be to the network, but also to Parliament and to society. And it will be about digitalization, as most of my work is on that. And Frans was already saying about this need for integral decision making was also the reason why the Committee of Digital Affairs was being established in the Netherlands. And I think that's still not happening enough. If you look at digitalization of education and the use of digital tools, it's really about, okay, how do we get a privacy-friendly tool or secure tool? But a privacy-friendly, secure tool or non-discriminative tool, is that a good tool? So we still need to widen up the discussion and talk about what is happening in the classroom. And there are still all kinds of effects going on and impacts that we're still not talking about. So this broadening up of the debate and really have a balanced and rich debate about the kind of impacts digitalization have, and not just thinking it's a digital tool, it will be good. Mm-hmm. It will only be good if we really think through its effects. So that's a task for all of us, I think, thinking this through and taking this task.
Thank you, Lina. And what would be your take-home message?
My take-home message would be allow decisions in a crisis to be taken on small bases, but because that's what at the moment, and there is a real crisis, is needed, but be prepared to infuse broadness as quick and as good as possible, because too small might be helpful in the first few days. A first responder to a crisis can't stop and start thinking, what is all going on? But we as a reflective community, whether it's strategic policy advice, whether it is technology assessment, need to broaden up and need to show that there is more at stake than there is seen in this first crisis. For instance, the global perspective, when we talk about vaccination, and Kim just said it, and I think it's in our report as one of the few important things that I would say is, if vaccination is going to help, it's not going to help if it's only done in the developed world, because even from a selfish perspective, it's very helpful, even from a selfish perspective, and I would say even more from a solidarity perspective, the virus will mutate on the other places and will bite us back. So we need to take a broader global perspective on these kind of issues.
Thank you, Hans. On that note, I am going to close the EPTA conference. So today we discussed the ways decision-making was influenced by uncertainty and pressure. We also looked forward to the future, discussing what challenges we have ahead of us. And I want to close off with two quotes. One quote I heard today from Mark, who said, knowledge can travel the globe faster than the virus. So that's also a lesson for us in the EPTA network. And another quote is from our dear director, Melanie Peters, who passed away this summer, who always told us to keep your distance, but keep close. So I want to end with that quote, and I invite you all to come into Gather Town to discuss what you've heard today at the conference and what's written in the report. And I want to thank all the panelists, Linda, Frans, Kim, Sophie, and Rosanne, all for being here today, and looking forward to seeing all of you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you.